The good news for you and I tonight on this fifth Sunday of Lent is that God always writes twice. Let me repeat that. God always writes twice. For that, my friends, is the truth of the Mosaic law. That same law that the scribes and Pharisees bring the woman caught in adultery to Jesus today with. It's the law. It's what Moses prescribed for such people, that they be stoned to death. But the truth of the Mosaic law that Jesus conveys to the scribes, to the Pharisees, to the crowds, to the disciples, to you and I, is that God always writes twice. Why? It's true. The woman was caught, and she was brought, and she was made to stand there. She was being held in her sin. She was being forced to neither go forward or backward. Paul tells us today in the second reading, just one thing, Paul says, this is the one thing I desire, to forget what lies behind and to strive to move forward, to do what we heard in today's first reading, what God is doing in and through us, and that is, see, we are told, I am doing something new. And the newness that God is doing is that God is choosing to write a second time with his divine finger. A couple months ago, as we were celebrating Christmas, thank God that's behind us, along with winter. But nonetheless, as we were preparing to celebrate Christmas, as is the custom, we get cards, and in the cards, of course, sometimes we get photos of families and the like. And this particular Christmas, I was amazed because I had received a card and a photo of a parishioner, a former parishioner of mine in a previous assignment that I had. It's a young family with children now. And when I looked at the photo, I was amazed to see, of course, how much older they had gotten, which reminded me of how much older I had gotten. Because, of course, this young man was a teenager when I was in my former assignment. But what struck me about myself as I saw that photo is I immediately remembered him for one of the most difficult times in his life. As he struggled as a teenager, having been dumped by his girlfriend, or he dumped her, I don't know what the story was. But nonetheless, he was struggling, and he struggled with depression. And on a particular day, because he didn't think there was any other way out, he climbed the water tower, thinking that this would be the end, and that would solve all his problems. Why, I and the fire department and the police department spent the better part of a day talking to him, encouraging him to come down from the water tower. And he did. And he moved forward. And he now has this incredible, beautiful family. That's the goodness of that story and how that ends. And yet, as I got this photo in the mail, as I saw him and his family, I realized I still saw him as this young man on the water tower. I was still holding him there. And isn't that true of all of us? When somebody makes a mistake, when somebody commits a sin, when somebody hurts us, when somebody has done something or said something that has caused so much difficulty in our lives, we participate in the same actions of the scribes and the Pharisees. We choose to catch them, we bring them, and we hold them, and we make them stand there. Because ultimately, if we hold them in their sin, why then somehow there's this sense of satisfaction maybe, that somehow we're getting even. But Jesus has none of that. Rather than choosing to do what the crowds and the Pharisees and the scribes are doing, standing there staring at her with her in the middle, what does she do? What does Jesus do? He bends down. He bends down. That same posture that he will take on Holy Thursday as he bends down to wash the feet of his disciples, it's the same posture that he does now. And he bends down, and what does he do? He takes his finger and he writes in the ground. We have no idea what he's writing, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's why John doesn't tell us what he's writing in the ground. Why doesn't it matter? Because it doesn't matter. Because the people there that day know what this is about. Because the only reality that they know of a being that writes with one's finger is God. And the Mosaic Law, the Ten Commandments, you know the story from watching the movie, right? God inscribes the Ten Commandments with his finger on the two stones that Moses has with him. And it's these stones, it's these commandments that God has inscribed in stone with his divine finger. It is these stones that Moses now brings down the mountain and recognizes his Israelites have messed up and they're worshiping a golden calf. And what does Moses do? He smashes the tablets. He breaks the commandments because the Israelites have done that. But we know that that's not the end of the story. What happens next? Moses goes back up the mountain and pleads to God for his people. Moses intercedes on behalf of his brothers and sisters. And God writes a second time. With his divine finger, God gives the commandments to Moses a second time. That's the good news, my friends. That's the truth of the Mosaic Law. That's the reason why Jesus bends down not once, but twice. That's the reason why he scribbles in the ground with his finger. Who writes with their finger? Nobody but God. It's God who writes with his finger. It's God who writes the message of mercy. And it is only after Jesus straightens up the first time that he invites those without sin to be the first to cast the stone. And we are told they all leave one by one. See, that's the problem there, is they're leaving one by one. They become isolated in their own judgments of others. They too have become isolated by making her being held in her sin. They have become isolated and they have lost sense of community, and so one by one they go away. And likewise, John doesn't tell us what they go away to. John doesn't tell us if they let their stone or their rock go. Chances are they didn't. Chances are they just walked away with their rock still firmly held in their hands, waiting for another opportunity. But nonetheless, they walk away one by one. So Jesus bends down again, and he does a little more writing, and he stands up and he straightens up, and he says to the woman, "Has no one condemned you?" And the woman only has one line in today's story. Amazing, isn't it? Only once does she speak. And these are her words. "No one, sir." That's an important line for you and I to hear. Because when she says, "No one, sir," the beautiful thing is not only has God forgiven her, but she's forgiven herself. Has no one here remained to condemn you? And she says, No one, sir. No one. You see, she understood what Paul is about. One thing only, to let go of the things that lie behind and to move forward to the things that lie ahead, to be able to strive to the goal, which is eternal life itself. That, my friends, is what happens in today's beautiful gospel story. In the end of the story, we are left with two people standing there, one representing misery, the other one representing mercy. And mercy transforms misery. Mercy transforms judgment. Mercy transforms having people held in their sin. Mercy allows somebody who's been caught, who's been brought, who's been made to stand there. Mercy allows that person to no longer be frozen in time, to no longer still be standing on top of a water tower, to no longer be that person that is held because of a mistake or a sin that they committed in their life, but rather mercy chooses to bend down. And mercy chooses to recognize that we have to give people, including ourselves, another chance. Because when we do that, then we are of the work of God. Because God's finger is still writing. Because the truth and the good news holds true for us today. God always writes twice.